The following podcast is a presentation of Project Entertainment Network.
Bizzong.
Bizzong.
Bizzong. Bizzong. Bizzong.
Bizzong. Bizzong. Bizzong. Bizzong. Bizzong. Bizzong.
This is Bizzong, the weird and wacky fiction podcast, with me, your host, Mr. Frank. What's going on, Zongers? Yeah, we're back again, bringing you another great Bizzong show featuring the world of the weird and the wacky in all of the fictions. You know what I'm talking about, Zongers? And this week, we're gonna really mix it up in a way that I have not mixed it up before. Not having a writer on this week, not having a publisher on this week, not having a comic book artist on this week, not even having a filmmaker on this week. I've had those types of guests in the past. I do not think, unofficially, I've not had on a guest of this nature as I've had this week. And our guest this week is an audio book narrator. Now, yeah, you could say John Wayne Communale. He does audiobooks too, but I never interviewed him directly in that capacity. And John Wayne is a million things. He's a man that wears many hats, even though rarely you see him wear anything other than maybe a Pittsburgh Pirates hat. Here nor there, because John Wayne Communale does not figure directly into this conversation. Who does figure directly into this conversation, Zongers, is a gentleman by the name of Mr. Ron Gabaldon. Now, for some of you, maybe that rings a bell. For most of you, maybe not. Who knows? Ron Gabaldon happens to be the voice of death. That's right, Zongers. Ron Gabaldon, this episode is going to be slightly self-serving, but, you know, it's more the spotlight's on Ron. So, Ron Gabaldon has narrated 2 of my audiobooks. Death Gets a Book and just released not too long ago, A Death in Toledo. So I've made Ron, he did such a great job with Death Gets a Book. I couldn't think of anybody else from here on out that should voice any of my death books, even though they're not series or anything of that nature. The characters are never the same exact characters. They are independent of one another. And yet still, he just killed the performance that I can't from here on out write any death book in good faith and not hand it over to Ron to do an audiobook version thereof. So, but that also speaks to what I think about Ron's talents as a narrator. Really, what I think, he's a vocal performer. As I was surprised, you know, I auditioned and had him do the book, but until I was really getting the feedback of him doing chapter by chapter, I realized, like, this gentleman is not just reading my book and changing his inflection a little bit as the characters change. He performed Death Gets a Book. He performed A Death in Toledo. So, you know, I think he's a great talent, and he is available not just to be the voice of death. He's available to do other things. He's looking to break into, you know, doing narration on Audible and any kind of audio platform of all types and varieties. We're going to get into that. This, Zongers, is a supersized interview, clocking it in almost 2.5 hours. So, what you're getting this week is part 1, just a little over the first hour of the interview. And then next week, Zongers will pick up with part 2. You know how I like to roll, try to keep it around an hour a show, give or take. I think only once or twice, maybe I've gone really far over that. But for a 2.5 hour interview, I couldn't in good faith make this a giant, like, 4-hour episode. So I'm splitting it up in 2. I really, really love this interview. You know, Zongers, when I go long, there's always a good reason that I go long. I've only really done it with Jeff Burke in the past, who's infinitely interesting for well over an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. So the same with Ron. I think such a great conversation. If you write books, take heed, because if you may be thinking about being in the market, you know, maybe not necessarily Ron is your guy, but things to consider if you're looking to step into the audiobook market. And if you're a narrator or thinking about being a narrator, there's a lot of great info here on just the process, the pitfalls. It's just such a robust conversation that just covered a wide breadth of topics. And there was a lot of back and forth since we had, the performer, and essentially I was sort of like the director to give him direction there. So this was our first time ever speaking live, as a matter of fact. So we had a lot of like further discussion and collaboration, like really cool, fun stuff that I think will translate well to all you fine zongers, and there will be lots of interest for everybody here. So enough of my babble. Let's get into the better babble from the sultry, sexy, sweet, satin voice of the one and only Mr. Ron Gabaldon. Give us the gong. It is my distinct pleasure. It's always a pleasure to have people on my podcast, but it is my distinct pleasure this week to welcome to Bizzong a very different kind of guest this week. I always interview writers. I interview publishers, on occasion people who create comic books, and even, really on the rare occasion, a filmmaker. But I think this is a true first where I have a voice acting talent who does audiobooks very specifically for the podcast, and we're going to get into all that stuff. But it's a sort of self-serving interview this week because I am esteemed to welcome to Bizzong this week for the first time the voice of death himself, the one and only Mr. Ron Gabaldon. Ron, welcome to Bizzong.
Hello. Thank you, Mr. Frank. And hello, Bizzongers out there. I'm really thrilled to be here. This is great.
This is I love talking to people all the time, writers, creators, anything like that. But it is a unique opportunity for me. I've never had very specifically a voice actor on my show before, and I'm stoked. Of course, it's a very self-serving interview for me because you have done 2 of my books in audiobook format. You're the narrator for Death Gets a Book, yes, and A Death in Toledo. We've released these 2 books in a very short span of time. Within the last, February.
It happened real fast.
Very fast.
It was, really like blam blam, like right after the other.
It's incredible that it's worked out as well as I've hoped. I think whether that served as well or not is another story. I think it served as well. But yeah, Death Gets a Book came out like mid to late February, and A Death in Toledo just came out in mid-April. So, it's like a 4 or 5 month span of time. You tackled 2 of my books, 2 of my 3 audiobooks now, because there's also Brats in Hell done by the wonderful John Wayne Commonale, which is another story in and of itself.
And he sounded great too.
John Wayne
sounded really good on that one.
And John Wayne's been a past guest on here, and he kind of got the gig because I just know John Wayne. John Wayne's a writer, he's a creator, and he just happened to mention on Bizzong that he was like tackling audiobooks, and I thought to myself, man, dude, you seem like a good fit for the Brats in Hell thing. But I auditioned and everything. Again, another story for another time. We want to talk about the voice of death because you are as we start out. Let's start out this whole journey here on the audiobook thing, because it's kind of a fun, interesting path that I think we both stumbled upon the same time, and it begins in pandemic times as I figure it.
Yes,
I don't know what
when civilization fell.
When civilization fell, you're not part of this part of the story, but for the longest time, I resisted audiobooks for 2 reasons. The first reason was cost, which you always hear people. My exposure to what audiobooks is, it's the people that do Harry Potter. It's the professional things. I've always heard thousands of dollars investment and everything like that. And I just didn't feel like I was there. So I always resisted it. Second reason is because audiobook wise, with me as a reader, I don't really listen to audiobooks. Never really. They weren't my preferred way of consuming a book. So I sort of didn't really see the value of the market. But step in before I connected with you, say 6 months before, there was a Twitter conversation with a writer called Duncan Ralston who asked he has some kind of question about whether people are exploring audiobooks. This is like, I think this is right around when pandemic hits. And I said to myself, or I said to Duncan Ralston, like, I don't know where I'm at in my career. I just don't see, putting that much money out. I don't know what kind of returns and blah, blah, blah. And he said to me, he replied to me in Twitter, this is all searchable if anybody's that ambitious, that, you would be surprised. You should check it out. You might not need to lay out $1,000 for some super talented person. So I was like, well, that's interesting. And I thought to myself, well, we're hitting pandemic here. Everybody is all of a sudden forced to stay home. And there probably are a lot of talented people that find themselves stuck at home, maybe looking for a different source of income. And maybe this is my moment to strike that audiobook market. Yeah. Because several of my writer friends who have dabbled in it say it's really, pretty lucrative over time. So I'm like, well, I have nothing to lose, right? So I took my most well-received book, Death Gets a Book, and I put up a snippet of it and through ACX and just said, well, I don't have a lot of money to spend here. Maybe somebody will work with me on this. And I put it out. I'm like, I have never experienced this before through this ACX thing. And I threw it out there. And Ron, I received probably no less than 24 auditions. And there were, I was very shocked within the space of probably 8 to 12 hours. I probably had 10 auditions, which I didn't even expect that much. And there were a couple that I kind of kept it open, male, female. I didn't really throw a lot of restrictions on what it was. And I got some auditions back, and I was like, well, this is interesting. That's interesting. And I let it go for a few days. And you arrived maybe more toward the tail end, the last 3/4 of auditions. And I'm like, wow, your voice grabbed me. And
nice.
You know what? I think it was, part of the audition. It was a scene where, Death is in a bar and meets up with a little midget Death. And, it was an opportunity to do a couple of voices. I also made sure there was a couple of cursing in there because there's cursing in my book. I wanted that to sound natural and nobody be uptight. So your audition came back, and when I narrowed it down, there were 3 people. There were really 2. The third was too expensive, right? So and not even my most preferred. There were really 2 people, and it was between you and another fella. And I was like, okay. And what won you the job, essentially, or the offer for the job, was my wife, because I played it all back to, I didn't let her in on this process. I played her the final 3, and she went right away, it's Ron Gabaldon. It's the guy. So I'm like, all right, that's it. I'm offering the position to you, and you took it up. Big agreement, and now here we are, 2 audiobooks later. You are the voice of Death, and at this point, I can think of nobody else. That should my series carry on. It's not technically a series, but I intend to write more of these stories. So I've hogged up a lot of time on your interview. So Ron, from your end, let's pick it up. I gave you my end of the story, so pick it up.
Okay.
Talk about how you stumbled on my audition for Death Gets a Book.
Okay. If I could give a little, I'm sorry, I'm tapping my mic here. If I can give a little backstory myself, I actually did listen to audiobooks. Okay. I listened to a lot of audiobooks when I was, I used to drive long distance.
Okay.
Across the country. And so that was if you got tired of podcasts, here's the people's history of, the United States, Howard Zinn. I'll blast through that whole thing. So I did listen to a lot of audiobooks, and, I started on ACX, where your book was posted, probably about a year ago. So right about the pandemic, I figure, and you're right. It's exactly, the way you've described it. I've got to do something else. I don't know how to code. I don't know how to code computers or make software and programs and things like that. I have friends who do, and so I have nothing really to jump to. But I'm involved in a theater group. I've acted and written comedy myself. So what do I need to get into this? And so a whole bunch of YouTube videos later, and I have two friends in the theater group who actually are started to hit it big with audiobooks about the same time I was working into this. And they gave me a lot of very helpful advice. They do mostly like gothic horror and gothic romance, time era romances, kind of thing. But they were really like hitting it big, and they were getting some series from some authors, and that sounded like something that I could work into. So they gave me a lot of good advice, and they helped me out with what kind of gear I should have. And you start off with a very basic type of mic, and then you get the better mic because you're going to need that, and it's a long-term thing. You're going to need better equipment eventually. So start getting it. It goes in tiers. It goes in like levels.
Right.
So you flip through all the different auditions that you could, all the different books you could audition for on the website. And, there's dog training books. There's books for day traders. There's, there's a lot of very dry, for a while it was all drop shipping. Like there were just tons and tons of books about drop shipping, which is that illegal? I'm not sure what that is, but it sounds like something like what Bitcoin used to be.
Okay.
Something you find on the dark web.
Yeah.
But just a ton of books like that. And then there's, some fantasy books and a lot of dark crime and a lot of erotica. Tons and tons of erotica.
Yeah.
So, you kind of flip through all those different things. And I'd sent in probably a good, maybe 6 auditions to various other books. And, even the nonfiction books, like I mentioned, the, books on dog training. Like, okay, well, I'll just do this because it's easy to read. It's easy to read, and it's easy to kind of, the Belgian Airedale is, has 6 legs instead of the normal 4 of an average dog. Their history goes back 28,000 years. These things like that. It's pretty easy to read. But I saw Death Gets a Book, and I read through it, and it just seemed really silly, and I wanted to find a book that I would actually enjoy doing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I could, especially for someone who's just starting out, it would be great. A lot of the advice I've been given is find a practice book. And I had read some practice books on my own for free and put out on my YouTube page. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to find something that I would just enjoy doing as a practice book. And that includes the recording, the editing, everything about it. So just actually from start to finish, here's a book that I can say, okay, great. I know what that experience is like. I know what it's like to produce an audiobook. Mm-hmm. But there was something about it was first of all, cowboy death. There was a cowboy
right
in it. And I have a ready-made cowboy voice that doesn't sound like every cowboy voice you would expect, and which I'm pretty happy with that kind of voice. But so okay, this seems really silly, and it's death, and it's deaths, and it's so there's more than one, and
right.
it seemed kind of, and especially because there's a midget tossing scene in the audition. And it just seemed like, okay, well, this could actually be a really good time. This could be a lot of fun.
Right.
So I sent it in and really wanted to nail it. Narration wise, and I'm going to start. I talk about the books. I really enjoy doing them. They're a ton of fun. The narration, the way it's written, just seems like it would be a normal person talking about this thing that is going on in front of them, but it has its own opinion about stuff. So that's a thing that I like to do. Anything that's kind of sardonic, that has a kind of, that has a kind of sarcastic take on things, but not being mean.
Right.
It's just very matter of fact. So I sent in the audition, and when you send in an audition, you don't really think anything's going to come of it. You just think, okay, well, I did my best, and there it is.
Right.
And if anything, because there's a lot of and this is a weird thing about, I think, audiobooks in particular. Sometimes there are scam books.
Yeah.
People put up, and it's weird. I'm still not clear how that works as a scam, but sometimes I just think, because I've auditioned for a couple books where I'm like, well, and I did some research. And you need to do some due diligence on who the author is and who the publishing house is, if there's a publishing house.
Yeah.
And I saw your podcast. I saw your Twitter, your Twitter profile, and okay, this is legitimate. This is a real thing. I'm excited for this. And so when you contacted me to do it, I was just like, okay, let's get into this.
Yeah.
I worked out the technical aspects of it, and so that it was consistent all the way through. There's, you read through the entire book. You have to mark up, so I print it out, and you have to mark up so I know what character is speaking at any particular time, and also for tone. You read through the entire book. I've read that book probably at least 6 times, I think.
God bless you.
Yeah, right. And also to if there's any typos or anything, it's just helpful to do, but also for the tone.
Yeah.
Because sometimes things dip into, narration dips into various people's heads. Sometimes you're in Wanda's head. Sometimes you're in Vincent's head. Sometimes you're just the omniscient narrator. So, you make little notes to yourself about how this should go and how a scene should go. You break it into these scenes. And so this should go like this. It starts off kind of sad and then it gets angry. And so it moves around, and in between you've got all these different people talking, all these different characters. Yeah. And seriously, what I like about it is that, because I have aspirations to do voiceover work. I love doing audiobooks. It's a ton of work, and I would continue to do audiobooks because it's a lot of fun. But I've always wanted to get into animation voiceover.
Yeah.
Which is it's a very difficult thing to get into. They say you got to start off in commercial, and then you can move over into, and then someone will notice you and move you into animation. But I think I'm doing pretty good as far as character voices.
Right.
The thing about the story is that it's not regular normal people talking.
No.
It's characters.
Yes.
It's these weird, basically it's like an Adult Swim cartoon that's been made into a book.
Right.
And so it jumps all over the place. There's all these different characters, and they have not normal voices. It's not just it's not just male talking to female, and it's not that back and forth kind of thing. There's weird banshees and midgets and all kinds of different classifications of death.
Yeah. And
so that's what I really got into as far as doing the first book and the second book, Death in Toledo, really expands that a whole lot, because you've got, first of all, it's a longer book.
Yep.
But you're introducing these elements of all these other different types of death. And so, getting into that. So that's how I came across Death Gets a Book, how I auditioned for it. I appreciate that you saw something in that audition. Actually, I should thank your wife.
Yes, you should.
Yeah,
she was the one that really hired you initially.
Nice.
But
thank you.
There's no doubt in your short, if it was 2 minutes, it was long audition about it, and that's what I was very specifically looking for, because I knew there was a cast of characters, and I knew with my book in particular, my books are a little hard, even in book form, to sell, being horror comedies. That's a weird angle to take. especially with writing, because not every there's people that don't appreciate that just don't think horror should be dark and grim, and there's nobody should be laughing.
And actually, I really appreciate that about the book too.
Yeah.
Is that because I've pretty much lived comedy, my whole life. I've lived comedy. I've written comedy, and I've produced and acted in comedy. And so I'm not so big on horror as much as a lot of other people I know, because I feel like there's not a lot of stories that haven't been told, or there's that every story's been told. Like it's difficult, and some people are very good at it.
Yeah.
Some people are very creative about horror, and I appreciate that. Like what was it? I think scalp was a thing that was brought up on a previous episode, and I like, oh yeah, that is scary. But
yeah, the bugs.
Yeah, right. Okay, yeah, that's scary. That's actually pretty frightening. But what I enjoy about this is that it's horror comedy.
Yes.
And you don't, it's a very niche kind of category of fiction. And because it's so irreverent, horror, the horror part of it is what is the irreverence.
Yes.
To irreverent to violence, and irreverent towards death, and irreverent towards living, and what humanity is, and that's it's what I liked about it, and it's what made it feel like this was a good fit, and I was gonna really enjoy this book.
That for me is always the toughest thing to convey or to even sell to people, whether it be in audio or in written form. Is like it's a good time, and it's not like I'm not poking fun at horror. I always try to like compare myself, like when they say, well, what's your stuff like, and I'll say Tucker and Dale versus Evil, or I'll say I'm a little more old school, like where I really come from is like old 80s movies like Saturday the 14th or Once Bitten with Jim Carrey, a very, very young Jim Carrey. Like that's
what was the movie with George Hamilton? He was a vampire.
You're gonna have to help me out on that one. George Hamilton.
Oh boy, George Hamilton is in a movie, and I think this is from the 70s.
Oh, even younger than me. Well, I'm
and
from
it's
the
like
70s,
Once Bitten, Twice Shy, or something like that. But yeah, he plays a vampire in it, and it's brilliant. It's really great.
That's the feel like I go for, and it's always been like I read all kinds of horror, like Stephen King and Clive Barker and all the greats, and even darker and more intense than that. But when I write, it just comes out goofy. That's me. That's my personality. And I've found, trying to sell this stuff, it becomes difficult. As a writer, I'm looking for people to edit the stuff, and they don't get it, and they think it's corny. So to sell it to as an audio book, that was a challenge to me too. Like, how do I pitch this book audition wise? Like, and you nailed the tone. You like picked up on that, and it's even rough in that little audition like thing, right? I got to pick out a section that's pretty exemplary of tone, of range, and a lot of things. And I just like, I don't know, this looks like a bunch of characters. There's some cursing, because for some reason the cursing was important to me and maybe you'll agree that it is, maybe people have a problem with cursing or casually cursing or whatever it is. There were a lot of factors that I took into. Yeah. Oh no. It flows off your tongue, inconsequentially, I guess is the best way to put it. But those were the things I was sort of looking for. Like, it's just like to nail this tone. Like, I'm selling this as horror. It's pitched in horror, and I'm trying to say it's comedy and everything. And that was one of those qualities that you nailed in the audition. And beyond that, like when we agreed to do this book and you started on it, the opening scene for Death Gets a Book, for anybody who has or has not read it, and everybody talks about this, for anybody who does read it, just seems to resonate, is that it starts out with a donkey show in where, oh my God, I can't even remember.
In Tijuana.
Tijuana. It starts out with
Tijuana
a
donkey show.
Tijuana donkey show. It's like,
Yeah.
that seems to be like either you're in or you're out type of thing. And when you performed that, when I first heard, chapter 1, the Tijuana donkey show chapter, I'm like, and this is not the scene you auditioned on, but when I heard that, Ron, I was laughing. When I heard you submitted that chapter, and I get to monitor as you submit chapter. When I heard that, I was dying laughing, and I said to myself, he owns this book. It is no longer my work. He is now performing this book. It seems to me like when a screenwriter, writes a movie or, a script for a movie and releases it to the world, and you're getting the feedback from the actors doing it, you're like, it's no longer my baby. And from there, like from chapter 1, when you started Death Gets a Book, the Tijuana Donkey Show, I was like, this is Ron's book now. And it was, you took off I was so comforted because I was hesitant about this whole process and everything. But you just sold me. And I'll tell you, by the end of Death Gets a Book, I'm like, this is like his performance. And that was the other thing I want to point out, is that this was not somebody reading a book, which from when I'm looking into audiobooks and everything, hearing the droll people just reading words on a page.
Right.
You performed, it's not, you're not reading this book. You performed Death Gets a Book, which exceeded my expectations, beyond your audition. And it's, I knew I was dealing with somebody theatrical and somebody who had bigger aspirations and everything. So I hired you. Yeah.
I mean, I can explain,
yes,
because audiobook narration is, there is, audiobook narrators would tell you they are also, they are actors. It is a type of voice talent.
Yeah.
And there are tons of audiobooks out there that are narrated by celebrities where all they have to do is just read the book.
Yes.
Right. It's because it's the quality or the type of voice that you hear. And, nothing against those type of books. But if, what is it? Johnny Depp reading Keith, Rolling Stones.
Keith Richards?
Yeah, Keith Richards' book.
Yeah.
God, I blanked on that name. But Johnny Depp reading Keith Richards' book, or even Johnny Depp reading any of Hunter S. Thompson's books, which I don't know if he did or not. I know that they were friends. But that's, you're paying to hear Johnny Depp read that book, and he just reads the book. Right. And so I've heard those type of books before, but I think the majority of audiobook narrators out there would call themselves actors because you have to internalize the book. And you have to, you have to really get into what it is you're reading for it to be believable. And for you to be telling a story, because as an audiobook narrator, you're literally telling a story. And so you want to have the kind of voice and the kind of cadence and the kind of tone that makes someone want to hear this story, that leads them into the next part of the story. That holds someone in suspense, that makes them want to continue being tuned in. And that's a talent. That's a thing that it requires some coaching and training. And I don't know. I've been telling stories for my whole life, so it seemed like pretty natural for me to do. So there is that element of performance that's involved in it. And this book in particular, I mentioned, there's so many different characters, and it's so over the top zany, and it's so weird. You couldn't there's no way you could just rattle this off as a person reading a book. It wouldn't capture it. Never. It wouldn't capture the quality and the tone of it. Right. It wouldn't take you on that wild ride. If I was just dryly reading the book so that somebody could hear it instead of having to read it.
That is 100% correct. And that for me was, I guess, unexpected for me, because talking business side of things, like I said, I always heard that, audiobooks cost thousands of dollars to make. And my exposure to audiobooks before we started was like, I heard snippets of the Harry Potter stuff, which that guy is just incredible, obviously. And I listened to years ago an audiobook version of The Mist by Stephen King, which had like surround sound, 3D sound thing. Like you had to wear headphones to really experience it, the way the stereo stuff worked. And also, I love the book World War Z by Max Brooks, and I heard that audiobook, which disappointed the hell out of me. And it was like you said, it was like Mark Hamill, the voice of this guy and everything. But a book I loved, World War Z, when I listened to it in audiobook format, it was very extremely abridged and shortened up, and I was left kind of disappointed. Those are like the things that turned me off about audiobooks, and as a writer, like I don't want to explore this, but I kept hearing people talking about it. So when I dove into this, I'm like, I understand I'm trying to do this on a budget. I'm trying to get the best and everything. So I was definitely very hoping for somebody ground level, also seeking, to break into audiobooks and everything. Like I thought that would be the best fit for this project. And Ron,
it couldn't have worked out better.
It could not. It was almost
honestly
serendipitous,
it could not have worked out
right?
Better.
It was almost
Kismet.
serendipitous, because when I heard you really get into this book, once we got the deal and you started getting into it, I'm like, my God, you owned the book. When I listened back at chapters, I'm like, this is no longer my book. This is Ron Gabaldon's a Death Gets a Book. Incredible. And I got
absolutely. It becomes its own thing.
It very much does.
It becomes a new thing that, and it's a thing about audiobooks that I feel like, because I've like I said, I went through some training, watched a lot of videos, and took a lot of advice from people.
Right.
And one thing that you hear from other audiobook narrators is like, don't do character voices, or be careful about character voices, because if you're not good at it and you can't pull it off, it's gonna sound weird. And I just thought, no, I can do this, and I know, and especially when you read the book. And these characters are they're fairly easy to grasp.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as like, okay, I know what this person should sound like. And you start off with a voice, and then you tweak it and you tweak it and you tweak it until you get to where it doesn't sound quite like the original voice you started off with, but now it's its own thing. Now it's its own person.
Right.
And it's a real person. It's a real person in this story who's acting out of their own motivations. And that's the other thing when you're reading through this dialogue, like what's motivating these characters to do the things that they're doing or say the things that they're saying.
Right.
And so I kind of came at it as that kind of voice actor where it's acting. And so, now this character is angry, and now this character is kind of depressed, and now this character is doesn't care about anything. So all of those different things enter into it until you get this audiobook that is like an audio cartoon.
Uh-huh.
Where instead of seeing scenes, a narrator describes it for you.
Right.
In the most sarcastic way possible. and in a very matter of fact, one thing I like about the narrator, and if I could just talk about the narration for a second.
You may.
I liked doing the narration. The character voices, great. So much fun to do. But the narration I love doing the narration because it's what everyone should be thinking.
Yes.
While they're reading this.
Yes.
Like if you were reading this, the narrator is basically taking over for the audience so they don't have to comment on the weird thing that they're looking at.
Right.
Because, so it has this kind of obvious quality to it. This matter of fact kind of he has these little asides, like he'll at the end of some of the sentences where he kind of just gives his opinion about what this is, and that's what the reader would be thinking.
Right. Yes.
And so he's not telling, he's taking the place of the reader or the listener from having to comment themselves.
Right. But you have to deliver that in a way that just punctuates it, which is it's where you show. One of the funny things was, once we started on this journey, one of the first things you asked me was like, all right, how does this guy sound, or how does that character sound? And I was like, you know what? Well, I really have no idea. I never gave much thought to the sound of the voices.
I thought that was wild, because like when I've ever written stuff, and I gave up writing, like I haven't written anything in a while. I used to do some writing, but like I have kind of voices in my head when I'm writing different stuff. And you mentioned that, like, I don't really think about what they sound like. Wow.
That was kind of an interesting hurdle early on. We had because I really never, it made me realize that I don't think a lot about my characters' voices, like very specifically the sound of their voices or their inflections all that much. But man, did you make me like become very self-aware of that? Because
you know what? I don't think you should be. I think in a way that helped make it what it is. You gave me the freedom to make choices, to make those kind of choices.
Yeah.
And then see if you like that.
I mean,
so, I'm throwing out, a character here, listen to this chapter because we introduced this one guy and, see what you think of that,
right.
Like and it's thrilling and kind of liberating for me to be able to, okay, get into it. Let me figure this guy out. All right. What's he like? What's he look like? You describe him in the book. What's his position? Where's he coming from? And what made him like? There's a boss death in Death Gets a Book, and especially because you first hear him as kind of feedback, and so I just kind of went, God damn it, Death.
Yes,
and
J. Jonah Jameson like personality.
Yes, right. So I was thinking of the guy who's in Princess Bride. I can't remember the inconceivable guy. It started off with that, and then it moved through Gilbert Gottfried, and then worked through to an angrier version of both of those things. Until but just the kind of angry kind of voice that I really enjoy doing.
Oh my God, that is where you excel, because these are the questions you started coming up with me, like, how does this guy sound? What is it? I'm like, I don't really know. Like, this is the part where you take over, Ron. You're like, but it was weird to me. Like, I didn't even consider this, when I started the journey about like how voices sound. And I'm like, God, I don't really know, and I sound like an idiot, but I don't know my voices, and I'm like, well, I'll defer to you. You're the voice talent, and I will defer to you, like, because I heard, like, you're excellent like this. You sound like somebody who knows how to grasp onto things. But that whole collaboration and vagueness that I gave to you opened up to things like the Death in Tijuana, where I remember very specifically sort of a back and forth of you're hearing this in your head, and we sort of settled on the Christian Slater from Heather's sort of voice, which was just, it was perfect. And I never understood how that voice sounded until you nailed it. I'm like, yes. At that point, once you...
I had to think about that for a little bit, because it's, he's, it's a slacker. He's obviously a fuck up, right? Not great at his job, but doesn't care. And I kept going through, like, now what kind of people are like that?
Right.
And, you could always go a little kind of, sad sack about it and whatever. But, something about just, I wanted him to really not care. Like, I really don't give a shit about what it is you're doing.
Right.
And so you know, he I'm sorry, I drift into these people,
you should do that.
It's you know, so it became that kind of, well, I guess we missed that one, you know, that kind of, so it gave it that cadence and that kind of Christian Slater / I think you mentioned Christian Slater, Jack Nicholson, kind of thing. And it works. It works so well for that guy. Suddenly he's got his own personality and he's not just, you know, a standard voice. He's got his own voice and it's his own thing. So I love doing that.
Yeah. And to me, that was like right there. Like, and then, of course that also happens early on, the Death from Tijuana. And I was like, you know, I have a vagueness about what these people sound, and you're just nailing it. Like you were figuring this out for me. And I was like, I just knew from there, like, Ron Gabaldon is the voice of like, you're stuck in this. You're stuck in this world, which is funny because while you're working on Death Gets a Book, I am writing a Death in Toledo.
Yeah.
And there was a funny thing that happened. I don't think I've ever discussed this with you, but because you know, as you said, I was like, I never considered the voices. Well, all of a sudden, that was, as I'm writing this and discussing these things with you for Death Gets a Book, those voices and the sounds of things and everything really became, you know, brought to the forefront of my consciousness as I was writing things a lot. And I didn't want it to overrun things necessarily because, like you said, like, maybe it's best to leave the, you know, motivations and the sound of things, like, let you interpret it, which I really believe is true. But I did definitely focus on, while I was writing A Death in Toledo, the way, you know, I would describe, when I wrote, I would describe things, like almost give you cues, right? And so did you find from Death Gets a Book to A Death in Toledo that there were more cues, like little crumbs left for you on how to approach those characters?
Yes. Yes, definitely. I mean, I know you had, I mean, because, you know, you describe, you know, they're just, I mean, especially like Bertrand's description could not be more graphic.
Yeah.
And so, and I had to work out a number of different types of voices. Like, what's this guy like? You know, ancient, so old. And we talked about that for a little bit. And I happen to have like kind of a voice that I call the infernal voice. And it's just infernal. It's just, it's this kind of, oh, well, I guess if we're going to be doing that. And, which I use for fun. And I thought, well, that guy.
Yeah.
That's him. That's, you know, that's Bertrand. And I will say, because you mentioned like, not thinking of voices in your head, a lot of, and these are also stories that I've heard, is that a lot of new authors to Audible and the website, the ACX website, they have very specific ideas. Like, I feel actually very lucky that you didn't have a lot of notes and that you weren't I wasn't constantly having to re-record a bunch of stuff. And correct things. Cause some people, that book is it's their baby and they know exactly how it's supposed to go. And I welcome that. I welcome those kind of notes. I have no problem, taking direction, from anybody, but you were just like, yeah, no, that's good. Oh man, that's great. No, that's awesome. And then it kept getting better and better. I'm like, holy crap, that was awesome. No, this is a really good chapter, man. Like, okay, well, I'm doing it right then.
Yeah, it was a weird thing because there was a lot of points where, like, I feel like, I don't know, maybe I should be grabbing these reins and directing him a little better. And, you know, I know when, like, you mentioned Bertrand, and I was like, you know, I sort of in my head, he sounds like Vincent Price. He sounds like Renfield.
Yeah.
You know, he has that, and you were like, or he got a voice for that and everything.
And I started there, kind of Vincent Price. I just watched a friend do a one-man show about Vincent Price, and his voice is in the higher register. So I thought, oh, well, that's a good, right there is where, because then it's not quite, you know, Vincent Price has a little deeper, a little more throaty voice.
Yeah.
But if you tweak things a little bit, like you start off with Vincent Price and you tweak it a little bit and you tweak it a little bit more, and then it's not so much Vincent Price, it's an individual thing.
Yeah.
It becomes its own creature.
Yeah, it's vaguely reminiscent of, so you don't really focus on the fact that he's just doing a Vincent Price voice, but it's vaguely reminiscent of.
Exactly.
And so it's you just listen to that voice. I mean, that is if your aim is to head into cartoons as far as and I think like immediately as I was listening to you, you have such a range. Your characters that you perform for Death Gets a Book and A Death in Toledo are so distinct from one another. Like, I'm like, to me, it's like you should be doing all these Gennady Tartakovsky and SpongeBob and all these. You should be a Nickelodeon, Ron. You should be a Nickelodeon doing voices.
Hey, your voice to the cosmos's ears.
Yes, I think you're on that path, and that makes me feel all the more luckier and all the more serendipitous that like we connected, because I kind of feel like my books were like the perfect fit for what you do. And
absolutely, it was a smorgasbord of things to practice on and like really get into, because I take classes and
right.
I've got coaches and things like that for a specific, especially for animation. But here is just, it's basically every animation side I could ask for like a year.
Yeah.
Of auditions for various characters. There were just so many different characters, and even little ones, even tiny little ones that like, oh, this guy only has 2 lines, but he's got to sound different than anybody else, and he's got to have his own personality and his own intonation and his own way of speaking. And so, yeah, it really like, I ate it up. I ate it up.
I could tell that. Like, obviously, at the outset of this, I didn't really, have a full view of like, what your aspirations were for all this stuff. But obviously, I got a sense of like, you're obviously aimed, and you should be aimed for bigger things and everything. But I definitely got the sense of like, you are just honing this all for like a bigger sense of purpose, and you're creating voices, you're creating a profile, you're creating a catalog of voices. And I saw that, and I'm like, this is definitely what you should be. You should not be the voice of death, but you should be like, this should be your springboard. And even through the collaborative process, hearing you, like you said, you're like, I forget which character it was, but you're like, oh, I have a very cool voice, and I gotta share that. I came up with this one. I'm gonna share this with my theater group and stuff because it's very cool. Or even like there's a big moment in at the end of Death Gets a Book where Morgan Freeman makes an appearance, and it's sort of, I guess, where you had liberties to make up voices. Morgan Freeman he's a character in a very specific moment.
It's very specific.
And
yeah,
and you had
really,
to,
I feel like everybody has a Morgan Freeman.
Yeah, everybody has a Morgan Freeman. And so there was sort of that look towards like, I know what's coming. I know Morgan Freeman shows up, but there's this like, how is Ron? I've given you the creative freedom to come up with these character voices, but at the end here, Morgan Freeman shows up, and so how is Ron going to pull off Morgan Freeman? And stellar. Absolutely stellar. By all feedback, you nailed the Morgan Freeman moment. The crescendo of the book itself with Morgan Freeman, you nailed it. Did it like, what was the pressure of that moment? You had to have felt it, reading that and getting prepared for that.
A thing like that you do over and over again.
Yeah.
It's a lot of like, because especially if it's a specific type of and especially because we're talking about a real person.
Yes.
And everybody has an impression of Morgan Freeman. So mine has to be good enough to be like, okay, I pulled that off.
Yeah.
And I feel like I did that.
Oh, totally.
Which I'm absolutely pleased with. And it was the thing that gets mentioned like most in the reviews. And from people I know who've like listened to it, like suddenly they just go, Morgan Freeman.
If you close your eyes and don't think about it.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
We are there, and it's it's not only Morgan Freeman, it's Morgan Freeman as the role in
as God.
It's a very specific moment, and you just nail it. And that was like, everything I hoped and dreamed of, listening to you submit those chapters up to that point, like the payoff, nailed it. So at that point, I'm like, I can offer Death in Toledo to no other person than Ron Gabaldon, and
I was thrilled.
And it's funny because I always tell I never wanted to be a series guy, writing books. But I knew I had to go back to the Death Well. It's just my most popular book, and money dictates everything. So I knew I had to go back there, and it was a couple of years. And so before I got into writing Death in Toledo, that's when like I said, it was almost coinciding while you were recording a Death Gets a Book, I was writing Death in Toledo. And so it was like, as I'm hearing your chapters, the more and more like, there's no other person, even though this is a separate book, the Death is a very different type of book, or different type of character. I'm like, I cannot in good conscience offer this to anybody else. And I just hope at this point, like that you accept it, because you just still nailed the first book, and thankfully, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart for continuing.
Oh no, thank you, man. I would do these books forever. It's like bringing up Johnny Depp again. It's like Johnny Depp and Captain Jack Sparrow. Like I would just keep doing these books because they're so much fun to do.
There can be no other.
If I could talk about the book,
you can
about both of the books. What I like is what I like in fiction, and what I like in because I read a lot of graphic novels, and I read a lot of fun, silly fiction. I think you just read Color of Magic.
Yes,
Terry Pratchett's.
Yes,
and I read that last summer for the first time, and I read Good Omens, which is a really brilliant Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman.
Neil Gaiman,
kind of joint. And I love that kind of just silly, irreverent comedy. But it's building a world,
right?
These books these books are they're creating an existence for these beings and humans to live on, and it has some rules. And it's loose about some rules, but it's got some very core rules.
Yes.
So it has some very specific core things that can't be broken, have to be followed. Getting your charge in at the end of the day. It's a very, very big thing, and it's a very big deal. And so there's your ticking clock, and that's the thing that everyone has to do. And it's what makes it a crappy job. Yes. I mean, the other thing I love about it is it's like a workplace comedy that takes place everywhere.
Yes.
At once. There is an office, but the office is so huge it doesn't even kind of register as an office.
Right.
It's what I enjoy, and so I love that kind of world building with rules. And where else can you go with it? Because once you've got that world, you can write any number of stories, and it doesn't have to be the same characters over and over again, because there's different things going on in this place and in that place and in this place. There's death going on all over the world, and so you're never just following the one death. There's plenty of other deaths to go around. There's this one over here. There's there's the death in Toledo. Well, what about the death in Des Moines, Iowa?
Yes.
What's that guy doing? What about the death in San Francisco? What's that death doing? So I love that kind of world building and expansion. And what I liked about Death in Toledo is that you're adding more elements to it.
Right.
Because, like I mentioned earlier, there is more than, there's other types of death. And so there's the world of death has a number of different types of creatures and things living in it. And so now we're seeing those things come out, and we're seeing those things interact with the regular death. And that's what I enjoyed about it. Is like, okay, well, we're getting bigger now
Yes.
in this world.
Yeah, I don't want to pigeonhole death into like one thing repetitively done over and over again. I knew early on, and before Death Gets a Book, there was it's all based on a short story I wrote that was the first thing I ever had officially published, called Death Gets a Life. Where it's a death in Boca Raton who just like, again, it revolves around work life. It's a very blue collar
Boca Raton, Florida.
Right. Where the death gets just so
constantly just
yeah, I'm just every fucking day with the old people and retirees just dying that he gets bored with the job and he stops doing his job, and then so like the souls, the old people start collecting on the beaches like nobody's picking them up. So there's this surfer guy who can't get from the beach to the ocean. And so he gets frustrated, and he goes. He happenstance knows where Death lives, and he like has to knock on Death's door and go like, "Can you please get these old people? I want to go surf." And it sets off and this is a short story, but it sets off a whole thing. Death Gets a Life, so he's like, "Let me take you out of the town, get you laid, and like have fun." And like Death gets out of his doldrums of working a blue collar job. And ultimately, like, takes all the souls of Boca Raton off on instead of like Charon on the River Styx as happens often, he takes them on a cruise ship, like just because they piled up. So it's a cruise ship down the River Styx and solves that problem.
That's so great.
Yeah, but that's where
everyone complains because they ran out of shrimp.
I couldn't get I couldn't get to the beach. I couldn't surf. That's where the story starts, and that's like my early writing career. But I knew from that story, Death Gets a Life, like, and people said to me unexpectedly had such a great reaction to it, because that was the whole backstory to that was like, it was another author who was writing a novel that had to do with death, like in the afterlife, and it was called Unfinished Business. It was a coroner who, if they touched the bodies of a dead person, picked up the vibes of their unfinished business, and they had to if somebody killed me, I have to figure out my murderer.
Wow,
that sort of thing. But he wanted to put like his reward was, because he was like a self-published author. It was like to get 2 unknowns. I'm going to put 2 like unknown short stories at the end and just write something about death. And I figured, to me, when I saw that challenge, like everybody's gonna write just dismal things about death and stuff like that. Like this is my moment to shine. I'm gonna write something that is not like just downtrodden and everything. So I wrote this Death Gets a Life. So I'm like, this is gonna be fun, and people
and that's the other thing that I liked about it was that it is about death, and
right.
It's so irreverent.
I think that's the most unexpected thing about it all. And to find, like I said, this is my first published thing, and to find, who I am as a writer from that point forward, like unexpectedly, because, once that, it became a popularity contest, you got to vote on whose story you like best. But people who were reading my story were like, that's really good. I wish I heard more. And like, from that point, I knew like I had to write more about this. And like I said, I'm not that sci-fi guy. I'm not series guy, but like I understood there was a world. I saw like the world that existed for this. So I'm like, that's where I started and wrote Death Gets a Book. I'm like, okay, this needs to be expanded from that idea I had about the death in Boca Raton. And then after I released that and a few other books, everybody just kept resonating with Death Gets a Book. And I'm like, obviously, I have to keep going with this. And that's where
there's a million ways you can go with it,
right?
Too.
And
I mean, that's what's so great about it. I think is that there's so many aspects. Of the myth
world.
Of death.
Yeah. That I don't have to. Yeah, I don't have to worry about writing a series. It doesn't have to be a series, but it's a world that has many facets. And I've spoken to you on the sly, and I'm not going to delve too much into this, but I have another angle on this world that doesn't necessarily revolve around the Reapers necessarily, that I think can be explored just separately. Again, I that's what appeals to me about the world I've created, is that, God, there's so many facets, and I could keep, I've done Death Gets a Book, and I've done, Death Gets a Death in Toledo, and now I've already got a story in mind, and I'll reveal it right here, right now.
Awesome.
It's called A Death and Otis, right? That's like in the back of my mind, a working title, A Death and Otis, which anybody who's read the books knows which way I may explore it, and obviously I hear nobody but you, Ron, in my head when I think about the possibilities of a Death and Otis or whatever that may become down the line. But I want to kind of rewind a little bit, and I want to like delve a little more into, because you're a voice talent and that's your aspiration, and the more, when I first started my journey into audiobooks, I got onto like the Reddit ACX, subreddits or whatever you want to call them, and I didn't. It was an unexpected factor that I didn't expect when I already had thrown my hat into it. It was, and you mentioned it, like the scam books, the dumb books, the weirdness, and I just did not expect that as a hurdle that narrators and audio performers have to navigate. And I'm like, because I'm just here with my legitimate book and everything. But when I started reading these subreddits about all these narrators, like, oh my God, I got 4 weeks into a thing and we had an agreement, and then it turned up he didn't have the rights to it, or somebody submitted an audition and it just doesn't feel right. And it seems to me, I was frightened at that point after I'd already signed an agreement with you, but my God, there are really like kind of frightening hurdles as a narrator, especially somebody, seeking to do work on ACX, have to navigate. Did you find that early on? Because I did not realize, like, you had been in the game about a year before you stumbled upon Death Gets a Book.
Well, and, okay, so how I come at this is that you have to figure that as a person who wants to make a living performing, and in any kind of performance, especially acting, voice acting, things like that, there is gonna be a ton of scams anyway. There's gonna be a lot of that kind of activity.
Okay.
Because you have a bunch of people who want to get into an industry, a business, a trade that is difficult to find like real big success in, but everybody wants that.
Yeah.
And like, I feel like I found a calling. Like, I found the thing that I'm finally good at.
Yeah.
Right. In my life. I've been on this planet for any number of decades, and went from thing to thing, and but here I'm doing this, like, and this is what I should be doing. So you have that certainty mixed with people who would take advantage of that drive, in people who will really jump at any kind of chance they have. You can't turn down a lot of opportunities, but you have to be smart about what you're looking for and what you see in those opportunities. And I had no idea. Like, I was just hearing stories, but a lot of the titles that I was seeing on ACX was like, just seemed kind of weird and a little bit not exactly above board. And then, you like you said, you read the Reddits, you read the Facebook groups, things like that. People tell all kinds of stories.
Yeah.
There's a narrator's roadmap website that kind of outlines like what the red flags you should be looking for when it comes to picking out scams.
Right.
And so I wanted to be really picky about what I was going to send an audition to. I mean, another thing is, like, I'm into indie DIY type of self agency.
Yeah.
Like so what I appreciate about about what you're doing is that this is homebrew. This is you're doing this on your own. You have control over it. But there's something very scrappy about that, and I've always been involved in that. I'm originally from Minneapolis, and I had a public access channel or a public access TV show that I did with a friend of mine, and it was a very punk rock kind of late night TV show that we did in a bar with a live audience and everything, and it was very like irreverent and goofy and silly and kind of a big middle finger to regular television as it was. And then at the end a band would play.
Yeah.
But
it was Wayne's World.
yeah, it was exactly. It was that kind of like, it was just really, we made it work and it was popular. People liked it. But I like that kind of production. I like it when it's, people who are doing it because they really want to do it and they have that drive to make it into their business and make it into their life, like that becomes their thing. So I'm drawn to that kind of thing.
Right.
But yeah, as far as scams go on ACX, you got to get good at picking things out like that. Or you're going to run into those kind of problems like you mentioned where you're 3 or 4 weeks into narration and then suddenly they pulled the contract because the rights holder didn't actually have the rights.
Right.
And who knew that Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities is available to be voiced and narrated by somebody, or Moby Dick. Wow, crazy. That hasn't been turned into an audiobook yet? I guess not. And so there's a ton of that out there. But like I say, like any kind of performance-based industry, you're just going to see that. You're going to have a lot of that out there. People will try to take advantage of people who chase their dreams, especially in performance, because there's a lot of vulnerable people. But it's just learning how to pick that kind of stuff out. And winnow down to the really good stuff that you're looking for is a part of the process.
Yeah, to me that was like surprising to discover through those subreddits that I was monitoring, and it felt a little like, I was put on the defensive as an author reading those ACX subreddits because they're populated by and large by vocal narrators. So they're very critical of the rights holders, the writers, and everything. But I guess I understand. Like, there's like somebody looking to cash in on. It's in the copyright free realm, Charles Dickens and all that stuff. So they like, here's my version of it.
You'll see all kinds of stuff up there that is not. I mean, and it's so weird. A lot of self-help books. Because if they're not using an established author's book and claiming that they're the rights holders, then they will slapdash a 3-hour self-help book that makes no sense. Like it just has to be words. It just has to be words. It doesn't have to make any sense. It doesn't have to be about the thing that the title is. It just has to be words. And so. I mean, ACX is getting better about picking that kind of stuff out, and narrators and other actual authors, which sometimes the narrator and the author are the same. They're very diligent about picking out those scams and reporting them to ACX, and ACX will take them down.
Okay, so that's a thing you can also like sort of self-police yourself. Like if you pick up on the fact that this is garbage, you can report that. To take it down. There it is, Zongers, part 1 of our super duper long interview with Ron Gabaldon, audiobook narrator, vocal performer to the stars, or at least to Death and His Compatriots. Don't forget, Zongers, Death Gets a Book and A Death in Toledo, both narrated by Ron Gabaldon, are available now on audible.com. But to my fine Zongers here, today, if you're listening and you're interested and you're excited about hearing Ron read a book, reach out to me on any of the social media platforms for Bizzong and just tell me you'd like to get a free code for either Death Gets a Book or Death in Toledo, and I will be happy to share a free audiobook code with you. All I ask in return is that when you're done listening, just leave a review for the book over there on Audible. It's really easy if you've never used Audible before to, once you're done listening, just give it a star rating and write a little quick review. But as you know, that helps tremendously. And I'm more than happy to share free copies of these audiobooks with you fine Zongers. So don't be shy about asking for it. So like I said, super long interview. We will be back next week with part 2 of this extended supersized interview with Ron Gabaldon. And until then, Zongers, you're now free to go and listen to these other great Project Entertainment Network podcasts.
What evil lurks in the heart of Don Mondo? Only Chucky the Buddha, the enforcer of the Mondo Mafia, knows. Join them each week on the Mondo Method podcast as Chuck tries to get Don Mondo to reveal what is best in life and where he hid the bodies. Oh, they also talk about writing and being professional authors. The Mondo Method podcast with Armand Rosamilia and Chuck Buddha, weekly, wherever you find your podcasts.
This has been a presentation of the Project Entertainment Network.